Happy. It's officially Halloween season. What am I kidding? It's 365 spooky in our life.
So past 4th of July now.
Which means that was the last major holiday before Halloween for the retail. So it's now Halloween season.
So yeah, if you haven't started decorating,
go for it.
Yeah.
Not that you need an excuse. Go for it.
It just stays up in our house all year round.
It just gets costume and prop changes.
Yep. But anyways, you'll notice we aren't in our normal surroundings.
See, we told you we come up to a place where there's water. You can actually see it behind me tonight.
Got a little bit of water back over here. But yeah, we're about 500 miles north of where we normally are.
Welcome to St. Lawrence Seaway.
So if you're watching from Central Virginia, don't be surprised.
We're sorry.
Well, and the sun will set a little later than... Yeah. So we'll have a few more minutes of sunlight up here this evening. And temperatures that are probably about 20 degrees cooler than what we got in Central Virginia. So
I'm sorry. Or not.
No, yeah. So anyways, hope that everybody's doing well on this Monday, our first, second Monday in July.
Yes.
Second Monday in July. And it's appropriate that we're in front of the water tonight because we are going to be talking about lighthouses. Now,
Part two.
Yeah, we have talked about lighthouses many times before. We last did a dedicated lighthouse episode, actually over 4 years ago.
Yeah, so we did Haunted Lighthouses and Ships on March 23rd of 2020. Tybee Island Lighthouse on Haunted Beaches, May 25th, 2020. Lighthouses of the Outer Banks on the Haunted Outer Banks on August 17th of 2020. Point Lookout Lighthouse on Haunted Point Lookout, Maryland State Parks, in January 18th of 2021. Seguin Island Lighthouse and Eerie Paddles in September 13th of 2021. Gibraltar Point Lighthouse in Haunted Toronto in August 14th of 2023. And Heceta Head Lighthouse in Haunted Oregon in January 1st.
Of this year.
Yep.
So yeah, we've talked about a lot of lighthouses before, but...
I may have a little bit of a passion for the lighthouse.
And lighthouses have a tendency to be very haunted, which is can be a little surprising because, normally you would think hauntings are generated by a lot of human activity, but lighthouses are kind of the opposite. We do have people there, or they did have people there, the lighthouse keepers and their families.
But it was routine activity.
Routine for many years.
Routine activity. So it's a lot of things being laid down over and over and over again. And God forbid when the bad things happened and they had to rush out and do rescues.
And they would get plastered by the elements as well over the years. So you got a whole lot of energy going on there. But yeah, so we got a whole bunch more of haunted lighthouses to share with you tonight. And there is a part 3 that we will get to at some point someday. But yeah, and the cats are here with us.
See?
Mr. Vincent saying hello. So they might be around. And my parents are here as well. So
we have an in-house audience.
We have a live studio audience this evening. So, but yeah, glad that y'all could tune in, and let's go ahead and dive in because we got a lot of material to cover.
Go for it.
So
I know you're petting on Mr.
Yes,
Nico
I got a Nico over here, but
Nico's Vincent.
So we're going to start just a little bit to the west of where we are tonight. We're going to go over to Michigan, where the western end of the Straits of Mackinac. You got this long peninsula and a chain of small islands that stretches westward off into Lake Michigan off of the lower peninsula, and it's known as Waugoshance Point. And Waugoshance, just for reference, is the local native word for fox. So that's where the word comes from. And these small dots of land had long presented a hazard to mariners. That's why over 180 years ago, in March of 1837, Congress appointed $5,000 for the construction of a lighthouse at Waugoshance. $5,000 for a lighthouse. Pretty good deal if you ask me, but that was over 180 years ago. I digress. Anyways, the job of surveying the site fell to Lieutenant G.J. Pendergrast of the U.S. Navy, who reported to Waugoshance to put his eyes on the scene and to request input from locals that were familiar with the waterways. Pendergrast immediately noted a major challenge to placing the lighthouse in that off the furthest dryland tip of Waugoshance, a dangerous reef extended another half a mile into Lake Michigan. It was clear to him that any shore-bound lighthouse would be of little use to any vessels passing through the strait. Pendergrast surveyed the reef and found a place that he thought would be viable for the placement of a lighthouse offshore about a half a mile from the tip of Waugoshance Point. He petitioned that a lighthouse be erected here without delay. Of course, an offshore lighthouse would cost considerably more to construct. 6 years later, in 1838, Congress provided $25,000 for the construction, but no action was taken. In 1847, another almost 10 years later, the work was transferred to the Bureau of Topographical Engineers, and by this time, more money was needed, so another $38,365 was added to the budget, and then another $20,580 was added, bringing the total of the cost of the lighthouse to $83,945. On time and on budget, they were not.
They don't exist.
Captain Augustus Canfield of the Corps of Engineers was placed in charge of constructing Waugoshance Light, and in 1847, detailed survey work was conducted on the shoal to form the foundation and the rocks. In 1848, 50-foot wooden square piers were constructed on St. Helena Island and towed 14 miles to the shoal and filled with stone. Concrete was placed in the hollow sections of the wooden piers, and block was stacked up amongst this to start raising the lighthouse and keeper's quarters from the chilly waters of Lake Michigan. In 1849, yellow brick was used to build a circular tower 20 feet wide at its base and 14 foot at the top. A 1.5-story keeper's quarters made of brick was connected to the tower by a 2-foot long covered way. The residence measured 22 by 29 feet and was fitted with a slate roof and copper gutters. The surrounding wooden pier measured 90 by 100 feet, rose 12 feet above the water, and was covered with 3-inch thick oak planks. In 1850, a spiral iron staircase was placed in the tower, and the lantern room and light apparatus were installed. The interior of the keeper's quarters was also finished, the pier decked, a boathouse and woodhouse built, a boat crane was set up, and the fog bell hung. With this work complete, Waugoshance Light was ready to begin operation in 1851. 19 years after Pendergrast identified the urgent need for a lighthouse on the site.
Urgent.
Yeah. In 1858, a fourth order Fresnel lens was produced, which produced a flash every 90 seconds, was installed on the lighthouse. By 1860, the wooden crib work protecting the lighthouse required thorough renovation. The Lighthouse Board requested $11,385 for the work, but then after examining the situation more carefully, decided that in 1865 that $200,000 would be required. To stress the need for the funds, the Lighthouse Board noted that the importance of Waugoshance Lighthouse was second to none in the lake region. Work on protecting the lighthouse's foundations began in 1867 when it was decided that a more permanent elliptical stone pier should replace the square wooden one. Excavation was carried down through the crib work in an attempt to reach bedrock on which the stone pier could be built. By the end of 1867, workers inside an iron cofferdam built by Detroit Locomotive Works and equipped with an airlock had chiseled away at the lake bottom to a depth of 6.5 feet below water. Noted engineer William Soy Smith was in charge of the effort, which was the first time in the United States that the pneumatic process had been used in sinking a caisson foundation for a lighthouse.
This is your civil engineer talking.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't bring myself to cut this from the script. I apologize. During the excavation, giant boulders weighing up to 4 tons were encountered, some of which blocked the edge of the cofferdam. These rocks had to be undermined and drawn into the cofferdam or drilled and split so the edge of the cofferdam could continue downward. I'll try to move forward here.
I can take care of that.
That's okay. After bedrock had not been reached at a depth of 15 feet, excavation was halted in 1868, and they basically said good enough. In 1879, the Lighthouse Board noted that the station was entirely out of repair.
10 years. 10 years.
Yep.
It's entirely out of repair again.
Another $25,000 to reconstruct that and added a steam fog whistle. And so work goes and carries on. They keep going ahead and spending more money on renovating and improving this lighthouse year after year after year. And it was wound up being quite the place by the time we get to 1900.
And quite the money pit. So by the time shipping has increased, ships have grown larger, additional lighthouses are commissioned in the region around this lighthouse. At this point in time, Waugoshance is actually rendered obsolete in 1912.
Yeah, so after all that work, 1912, they go ahead, rendered obsolete, discontinued, they shut it off.
Yeah, so Then comes, of course, World War II, and in August of 1943, the Navy takes control of several islands in the northern of Lake Michigan, including those off of the Waugoshance Point, for training naval forces. Guess what they're going to do?
They bomb it and they shoot the hell out of it.
Yes, it is bombed. It's a gunnery range for the Naval Air Station at Traverse City, and it's strafed by the pilots. One assault on the lighthouse actually reportedly resulted in a fire that burned out the interior of the structure. In 2009, the lighthouse is deemed excess by the Coast Guard and is offered at no cost to eligible entities under the provisions of the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act of 2000.
So things do not go well even after this lighthouse is offered up for free. The Waugoshance Lighthouse Preservation Society was the one that initially was awarded the lighthouse. Unfortunately, this was not the saving grace that they had hoped for, because the Preservation Society decided to dissolve the nonprofit organization after determining that the lighthouse just simply could not be saved. And so they go ahead, the government takes back the lighthouse and says, oh, we disagree, we're going to go ahead and put it out there again. And, well, nobody has stepped up yet to try to save this lighthouse. And it's sitting out there basically
covered in guano.
Yeah, covered
in bird guano.
Yeah, and just about ready to fall into Lake Michigan unless somebody else steps in. And this is rather unfortunate for the lighthouse's resident spirit.
Yeah. So during its years of service, of course, they required a head keeper and 2 assistants to operate this lighthouse. 2 head keepers perished while serving at the lighthouse, Thomas Marshall in 1886 and John Herman in 1900. Now, Herman was the one who was known to have frequent drink as well as play and occasional prank. One night, he decided to lock his assistant keeper in the lantern room and left him there. Happy with his prank, John wandered off in a drunken stupor away from the lighthouse, never to be seen again. When the assistant keeper eventually escapes the room, John is nowhere to be found. The assumption was that he continued drinking and fell into the river. However, there is no official record of John dying at the lighthouse, and it's likely a popular legend that got embellished. Recent research actually does indicate that 41-year-old John had been on Mackinac Island in that October under the care of a doctor, and he died on October 14th of 1900 of a heart attack. But, you know, that's not a good ghost story lead-in, so you have to have him playing a prank and wandering off and dying in the water. Because that's what we do. So whether a legendary disappearance or more mundane death on Mackinac, John's successors have reported bizarre activity. Doors would open and close on their own. If a keeper fell asleep on the job, chairs would get kicked out from underneath them. Coal buckets would fill themselves, and the coal was being shoveled into a fire by unseen presence. Silverware would rattle in the drawers, and furniture would move about the room as if by a poltergeist. It became so bad that keepers refused service at this remote light. According to author Frederick Stonehouse, there's a second ghost of a man who was actually killed during the initial construction. It's said you can hear his cries at various times along the lighthouse and house.
Today, Waugoshance Lighthouse is considered to be a nautical graveyard because of the many wrecks in the vicinity, and resides on one of the most endangered list of lighthouses. The spirits only enjoy the company of cormorants that have taken over the structure. It seems to be just a question of when this lighthouse will succumb to the elements and fall into Lake Michigan, unfortunately.
And join those gravestones.
Yep.
Or grave ships.
Yep. So, next up,
we're going to go to Connecticut because we're going to bounce around tonight.
Connecticut or New York?
There was debate about this.
There was much debate about this.
So it's called Stratford Shoal, or it's known as Middle Ground Lighthouse.
Smack dab in the middle of Long Island Sound.
Yeah. So Stratford Shoal Lighthouse has frequently been classified as a New York lighthouse, and the land, less than 1 acre, where the lighthouse was indeed ceded to the federal government by the state of New York on May 11th of 1874. Official maps today, however, place the lighthouse on the Connecticut side of Long Island Sound by a good 1,000 feet. The debate over whether the lighthouse should be classified as Connecticut or New York will likely never be settled. But with this geographical quirk, it has also led to the lighthouse being known as Middle Ground Lighthouse. The earliest known maps of Long Island Sound charted by Adrian Block during his explorations of the area in 1614 show 2 islands where Stratford Shoal House now stands. Over the following 100 years or so, the sea washed the islands off of the map, leaving behind the dangerous middle ground shoal. Measuring 3/4 of a mile long, the rocks were located roughly in the middle of the Long Island Sound and is covered by less than 2 feet of water. They were a constant and dangerous threat to ship traffic. The earliest known attempt to mark the rocks was around 1820, when a couple of spare buoys were placed in the north and south sides of the shoal. The Lighthouse Board placed the lightship at the southeastern edge of the shoal in 1838. The 100-ton ship was alternately known as Middle Ground Floating Light, the Stratford Shoal Light Vessel, or the Stratford Point Light Vessel, until it received the designation of LV-15 in 1867. The ship showed its lights from each of 2 masts and carried a crew of 6. The single anchor that held the ship in position was sorely inadequate. Only 8 days after going into service, the lightship drifted off position. Despite adding 2 larger anchors, the problem persisted, and the ship dragged anchor many times over the years. During the winter of 1875, pack ice pushed the LV-15 aground at Orient Point. The following year, the ship was reported missing and finally found near Faulkner Island, 20 miles away.
Oops. In 1872, the Lighthouse Board recommended that a lighthouse be built to replace the aging and troublesome lightship. And, well, money was requested for the project. And, well, money adds more money. And eventually we do finally get to when they start construction. This time it doesn't take them nearly as long as it did at Waugoshance. But after the recommendation, foundation work was completed about 4 years later in December of 1876. And then from there, they built the stone keeper's dwelling and tower through 1877.
And also cisterns and a cellar because, middle of the salty water, you want to collect that water.
Yep. And the lighthouse foundation was actually built using huge blocks of granite that were attached together using these thick cast iron staples. So you might have seen it anywhere where, they go ahead and they tie big chunks of rock together, the iron pieces that tie them together. That's basically what they used. And so the tower raised about 3 stories high, and it's attached to the south side of the keeper's quarters, which was a 2-story dwelling measuring about 28 foot square. And that's 28 foot by 28 foot, not literally 28 square feet. That would be ridiculously small. And, of course, you do have the spiral staircase that leads up to the lantern room and provides the only access between the floors. The first keeper at Stratford Shoal was an Irish immigrant named William McGloin, who had previously been captain of LV-15, even though he couldn't seem to keep it on the shoal. Anyways, even though the keepers had 2 assistants, the station was very isolated and windswept, and there was a quick turnover of personnel over the years. Visitors were urged to bring stacks of the latest newspapers with them to help the keepers stay in touch with news on the mainland. The lighthouse received regular updates during its years of service, eventually receiving a 4th-order Fresnel lens and an oil engine powering the foghorn. It was well cared for and reflected the importance of its position along the busy waterway. Efforts to automate Stratford Shoal Lighthouse began in 1965, and the plan was for the station to be fully automated by 1966. A 24-inch lighthouse beacon was installed and to replace the Fresnel lens, but several automation issues relating to the foghorn and radio beacons were experienced. It wasn't until 1970 that the last of the crew was assigned elsewhere, fully automating the lighthouse. Since then, much of the interior detailing has been removed, but its striking exterior remains largely intact, and it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1990.
On May 2014, Stratford Shoal Lighthouse was deemed excess by the Coast Guard and made eligible for purchase under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. In 2016, Nick Korstad, who owns the Borden Flats Lighthouse in Massachusetts and Spectacle Reef Lighthouse on Lake Huron, was notified that his plan to use the Stratford Shoal Lighthouse as a museum where guests could spend the night had been accepted. Korstad had hoped to have the lighthouse ready to welcome guests in about 2 years, but the bottomlands issue and uncertainty over where the lighthouse was in relationship to Connecticut or New York caused the steel to fall through. The General Services Administration initiated the public auction for the Stratford Shoal Lighthouse on June 20th of 2023. 7 bidders participated in the auction, which ended on September 13th with a high bid of $261,000. That's all we know about the ownership of the lighthouse at the moment. Time will tell whether it will what will become of this historic haunted location. Now, the haunting tale originates from before the lighthouse was built. The ship Trustful was ready to set sail out of Bridgeport with a load of church bells as a major storm approached. As the sea started churning, some crew members started talking about staying on land and abandoning the ship. The captain, notified of the event, told all crew members that the bells would peal a dirge to the white-livered folk who stayed behind if the boat sank. The crew reluctantly stayed aboard, and almost as if it was prophecy, the ship ran into the shoal, sank, and drowned all those aboard.
Had a bunch of Marty McFlys on there. All you have to do is call him Chicken and...
Yep.
Did you call me?
Yep. Anyway, the mariners claimed that afterward, when approaching the shoal in inclement weather, the muffled sound of church bells can be heard beneath the waves, including into the era of after the lighthouse was built, and to try to help prevent such tragedies from happening again. The isolation of the station may have actually driven one assistant keeper mad. In 1905, Gilbert Rulin, the head keeper, was ashore for vacation. This left his 2 assistants to take care of the station's duties. The first assistant keeper was Morel Hilse, a 54-year-old Long Island native and former sailor who had just arrived from 2 years of duty at Rhode Island's Whale Rock Lighthouse. The second assistant keeper was light station service rookie named Julius Coster from New York City. Now, newspapers report that suddenly, without warning, Coster charged at the other assistant with a razor lashed out at the end of a pole. Completely surprised, Hulse managed to fight him off, and Coster seems to calm down for a time being. But similar events reoccurred over the next few days, forcing Hulse to resist falling asleep at any time. Besides fearing for his life and being on the constant lookout for attacks, he had to keep the light going. This went on for 5 harrowing days, culminating when Hulse noticed that the light had stopped revolving and ran to the lantern room to find Coster preparing to destroy the lens with an axe. Somehow, Hulse prevented the destructive act, and once again, after hours of pleading, Hulse persuaded Coster to come out and talk with him. When Coster came out of the lantern room, he decided to jump off the tower into the water. Hulse quickly dove in and rescued him, fearing for his safety and Coster's. Hulse tied Coster up and kept him at the lighthouse tower for 2 days until help arrived. Now, Coster had a number of self-inflicted wounds on his neck, and he was returned to New York City home, where he was soon successful in ending his own life. Although Coster did not perish at the lighthouse, many believe his spirit still appears around the lighthouse, throwing tantrums. Keepers and Coast Guardsmen witnessed doors slamming in the middle of the night, chairs thrown against the walls, loud grinding and crashing noises, posters ripped down. Hot water pans have also been observed being flung onto the floor from the stove. Ever since the lighthouse was automated, the local mariners go by the lighthouse and still claim to hear lots of banging, grinding, and loud sounds, as if the ghost of Coster continues to rage in a location that drove him mad. What are you trying to do?
Do not lick the tablet. Anyways.
Nose prints of Nico.
Yeah. Next stop, we're actually just going a few short miles away, up to the northwest, about a mile off the Connecticut shore, where we have Penfield Reef Lighthouse. It's situated just off the entrance to Black Rock Harbor. Penfield Reef Lighthouse was one of the last offshore masonry lights to be built when it was constructed in 1874. Most offshore lights built after this were cast iron towers built on cylindrical cast iron foundations. So this was the last time they went out and literally just stacked block in the water. But anyways, Penfield Reef, named after an early prominent family in the nearby community of Fairfield, has for centuries been a dreaded hazard to mariners sailing Long Island Sound. For years, it was known as the Blue Line Graveyard after a string of blue line barges grounded on the reef. Even with a modern lighthouse now in position, flashing a strong light as a warning, it's not unusual for several boats a year to run aground on the reef. Penfield Reef is over a mile long, extending out from Penfield Beach in Fairfield, Connecticut. Even as late as the middle of the 19th century, only a pair of buoys marked the reef, and ships were regularly hitting the rocks. The steamer Rip Van Winkle, loaded with passengers, ran aground on the reef in 1864, but miraculously, disaster narrowly was avoided. Incidents like this led local mariners and merchants to protest loudly for a lighthouse to be placed on the reef. In 1867, Captain D.C. Constable of the Board of Lighthouse Commissioners declared Penfield Reef to be the most dangerous locality during fogs and snowstorms upon Long Island Sound. It took a few more years, but finally in 1870 and 1871, Congress allotted funds for the construction of the lighthouse. First, a granite riprap foundation was laid down, followed by an 18-foot tall pier, which was made out of cut granite, and the pier was filled with concrete, although space was left for a basement. Then a 28-foot square keeper's residence was built on top of the pier. The first floor included a kitchen, sitting room, and oil room, and a wooden stairway led to 4 bedrooms on the second floor. The lighthouse began serving mariners in 1874 when a machine-operated fog bell and fourth order Fresnel lens with a flashing red light at a height of 54 feet were placed into operation. In 1969, the Coast Guard announced plans to tear down the venerable granite structure and replace it with a pipe tower, but local residents were having none of it, and with the assistance of politicians in the area, Penfield Reef Lighthouse was preserved. The beacon was automated in 1971 after 97 years of manned service, and more than 70 local boaters joined the Penfield Power Squadron in a sail-by tribute to the lighthouse that day. The station was manned 3 more months while doors and windows were sealed up, and in the following years, the structure suffered from neglect. In 2000, an inspection showed that one of the main support beams had rotted, causing the lantern to tilt noticeably. The following year, water leaks in the lantern were repaired and mortar joints repointed, and a new stainless steel roof was placed on the lantern room. Penfield Reef was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1990. Although it is reportedly possible to walk to the lighthouse during low tide, legend says that an incoming tide swept away one family attempting the crossing. In any case, it is not considered advisable, and the safest way to get a close-up view is in a boat. This ride is best done with a captain familiar with the area, lest you go and wind up on the rocks like so many before. The Coast Guard made preparations in 2005 to declare Penfield Reef Lighthouse expendable property and to transfer it to a new caretaker. Although several organizations initially expressed interest, only the town of Fairfield and Beacon Preservation submitted a formal application. Beacon Preservation was informed that they had submitted a superior application in July of 2008, and were being recommended to assume ownership of the lighthouse. However, several years of legal and political battles ensued, and Beacon Preservation decided to abandon their claim to Penfield Reef Lighthouse in 2011. An online auction for the lighthouse was conducted later in 2011, but only 3 bidders expressed interest, and the winning bid was only $45,000. Again, legal issues that would arise when the winning bidder learned that the lighthouse is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and must be maintained within the guidelines set by the Connecticut Historical Society. They said, no thanks. Hurricane Sandy did a number on Lighthouse in 2012 with 30-foot waves and a 13-foot storm surge pushing in panels and covering doors and windows and ripping apart the built-in gutter on the roof. And after receiving funds from the Disaster Relief Appropriations Act in 2013, the Coast Guard invited bids again in 2014 for repointing the exterior granite, erecting a new railing and access ladder, and repairing the exterior of the lighthouse itself. Project cost about $1 million. Most recently, Penfield Reef Lighthouse hit the auction block again just this past summer, this time selling for $360,000. But no plans have been announced as of this time, and when any new tenants decide to eventually move in and start doing some work, they will need to make sure to leave some room for the resident spirits.
So it's believed that it is haunted by the ghost of an old keeper. Big surprise. This is a keeper who drowned trying to get ashore to see his family. Keeper Frederick Jordan, who was 38 years old, hadn't seen his family for weeks due to a series of storms that stranded him at the Penfield Reef Lighthouse. He was finally relieved by assistant keeper Rudolph Eiton, and on a cold morning of December 22nd, 1916, a series of gale force winds came up suddenly, churning the waters, but the keeper decided to row ashore anyway to join his family with the handmade Christmas presents he had gotten them, or made for them. Jordan set out around 1:30 that afternoon, but huge waves quickly started to toss the keeper's boat. Suddenly, a large sea swell caused the huge wave to crest and break over the craft, spilling Jordan into the icy waters a couple of hundred yards away from the lighthouse shore. Assistant keeper Rudolph Eiton watched in horror as his friend struggled over the raging waters. Eiton hopped in a boat himself, and he tried to row towards keeper Jordan, but the wind shifted against him. He couldn't get his boat near the keeper, who at this point in time had drifted nearly half a mile away from shore with the constant wind gusts. Fearing for his own life, Eiton had to give up on the rescue and watch keeper Jordan drift helplessly away, eventually drowning in the cold seas. Jordan's body was later recovered, and Eiton was absolved of blame for the death. He was then promoted to the next keeper of Penfield Reef Lighthouse. Weeks later, Eiton claimed he felt a constant unearthly chill in the lighthouse, and Eiton said he was visited by the spirit of his old boss on stormy nights a few days after the tragedy. They all say that the lighthouse keepers are mad, he told a local paper in the 1920s. Some days later, on what was one of the worst nights of history in Penfield, when the waves were dashing over the lantern, I was awakened, I was off duty, by a strange feeling, but somebody was in my room. Sitting up distinctly, I saw a gray phosphorescent figure emerging from the room formerly occupied by Fred Jordan. It hovered at the top of the stairs and then disappeared into the darkness below. Thinking it was the assistant keeper, I called to know if anything was the matter, but he answered me from the lens room that all was well. Later in the article, Eiton describes how the logbook mysteriously turned to the page recounting Jordan's death. In the following months, Eiton claimed to have witnessed a hazy figure coming out of the lantern room at various times, and that the light would begin to behave strangely each time the ghost appeared. Ever since, Jordan's ghost is said to have haunted the area, keeping an eye on the lighthouse and the boats. Years later, another keeper at Penfield Reef Lighthouse reported seeing a figure of an old man dressed all in white floating down the stairs of the tower and then disappearing after leaving the tower door. On a stormy, foggy night, other keepers have witnessed a ghost or shadowy figure in the lantern room, swaying, sometimes moaning, as if in pain. The owner of a power yacht reported that in rough weather near Penfield Reef, his boat was guided safely by a mysterious figure in a rowboat, which seemed to disappear once they were in safe, calmer waters. In 1942, a few youngsters were fishing near the lighthouse when they capsized their boat. An old man appeared from a nearby rocky shore, directed the boys to safety at the lighthouse's base, and then disappeared. When they went to thank them at the lighthouse, the keeper did not know who they were talking about. After seeing his photograph on the wall, the boys identified Jordan as the rescuer. A Bridgeport post from March 16, 1972, told of residents on the shore reporting an erratic light flashing at the lighthouse, and a Coast Guard vessel being dispatched to investigate the problem. Although a mechanical cause was discovered, the article reported that some old salts in the areas attribute the mysterious malfunction to the ghosts of the former lighthouse keepers. Until we know more about who has purchased the lighthouse, let's hope that the historic light and his resident spirits have a bright future ahead. Any questions?
No questions.
Okay.
Just some comments.
I have noticed that our replay on our computer screen has been freezing every now and then.
Yeah, hopefully the recording itself is
fine.
Is fine because it's not playing very nicely for us.
Yeah.
But anyways, again, we're not going to go too far from the next one. There's a lot of haunted lighthouses in the vicinity. We're just going to move a little to the east where we arrive at Block Island. Situated a little over 10 miles off the coast of mainland Rhode Island, this community feels a world away from it all, but it just takes a short boat ride to get there. Its location off the coast made Block Island a navigational landmark and navigational hazard for many years, resulting in the commissioning of lighthouses at the north and south ends of the island. For the sake of tonight's episode, we will be having a look at the southern lighthouse, appropriately named Southeast Light. Located atop Mohegan Bluffs, Southeast Light is New England's highest lighthouse with its 52-foot red brick tower, placing it 258 feet above sea level. First lit in February of 1875, the need for the lighthouse was made clear after the wreck of the Palmetto in 1858. The public outcry for a safer passage through this area resulted in a bill signed by Ulysses S. Grant to authorize the construction. The lighthouse features a first-order Fresnel lens that was originally illuminated using pig lard in its earliest years.
Yummy.
It smelled like bacon, I bet. After 5 years, it was switched to kerosene before being electrified in 1929. We all like bacon, come on. The completed lighthouse in its Gothic-type architecture was known as one of the grandest in the nation. It was built during Block Island's time as a major resort, which accounts for its ornate architecture.
I mean, it is a gorgeous lighthouse.
Yes. Now, during the infamous 1938 hurricane, the windows and many shingles were blown out and the power was knocked out for close to a week. The lens had to be turned by hand until the power was restored.
Which was not an easy thing.
No, but the damage was insignificant compared to everything else in the hurricane's path. The only building on the grounds to survive completely untouched was the outhouse.
Woo! Working bathtub.
Yeah, well, one day later, the keepers knocked it over so they could replace it with indoor plumbing with the newly
Hey, it worked. It was working. And it wasn't haunted.
In 1939, a huge burning gas spill was created from a Texaco gas tanker that got caught in a fog and wrecked near the Mohegan Bluffs. Although there were no injuries, the Coast Guard had to sink it for safety reasons, and it has since become a popular scuba diving site.
I wonder if Paul's been there.
Good question. Over the years, the Mohegan Cliffs were eroding dangerously close to the lighthouse, and there was the fear that the lighthouse would fall over the bluff and into the sea from the powerful storms that constantly pounded the shoreline. Funding was acquired in 1993, and the lighthouse was moved to its present location about 300 feet from the cliff edge. It took 19 days using 800,000 pounds of steel to support the building, with 38 jacks capable of lifting 60 tons each. The over 120-year-old brick lighthouse with the attached keepers building weighed in at 4 million pounds. Before the move, the priceless first-order Fresnel lens had to be removed. After the move, the lens was replaced with a first-order lens from Cape Lookout Light, located in North Carolina, which is really kind of interesting because that was another lighthouse that, too, was moved back to prevent it from being
sucked into the ocean. The land shifted on the dunes there.
Wait, Wait, no, not Cape Lookout. It was Cape Hatteras.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know where
Still, lighthouses get moved because land shifts.
Carrying on. Southeast Light was relighted on August 27th of 1994. In 1997, the lighthouse was deemed a National Historic Landmark as one of the most architecturally sophisticated lighthouses in the country. The former murdered wife of a lighthouse keeper is believed to haunt the lighthouse as an angry poltergeist even after the lighthouse was moved back from the eroding cliffs.
So the story that goes into the early 1900s states that a keeper had a violent argument with his supposedly nagging wife who was bored and depressed in the lighthouse. In a fit of anger, he pushed her down the tower stairs, causing her death. She was found with a broken neck at the foot of the stairs. Locals knew of the contentious relationship between the two, and so the keeper's claims that his wife had thrown herself down the stairs in a fit of temper or despair fell on deaf ears. The authorities quickly relieved him of his duties. He was arrested, charged with murder, convicted, and sent to prison, never to be returning to the lighthouse. Many islanders believe that Mad Maggie, as she's called, returns to haunt the lighthouse, harassing any male visitors or keepers of the light. They have reported to have been the recipients of this poltergeist's wrath and have claimed to have been locked in rooms and closets, have their beds lifted and shaken, and have had some claims that sharp objects, including knives, have been thrown at them. This might be a girl's trip, not for you.
Yeah.
Many have witnessed her ghost banging pots and pans and not caring if anybody was watching her. One account involves the ghost chasing the keeper out of bed into a cold night dressed only in his underwear, locking the door behind him. The poor embarrassed keeper had to go to the Coast Guard to have them reopen the lighthouse so he could get back in. Ever since 1993, when the lighthouse was moved back from the eroding cliffs, men have reported seeing the ghost of Mad Maggie rushing up and down the stairs in a rage, rearranging furniture, and has reportedly been observed throwing food to those men, at those men who have visited her kitchen. You okay?
Yep, I made a bad typo.
Oh dear.
So,
fix that.
Fixed it.
Men who have stayed in the lighthouse have claimed that their beds have been lifted off the ground, shaken. She stomps up and down the stairs, and she leaves the women and children alone, although children have reported hearing the pots and the pans rattling. Another tale associated with this light is related to the shipwreck off of the island's northernmost point. The ship was called the Palatine or Princess Augusta, and is sometimes seen on the waters far below the southeast light, its sailors guiding the vessel around the coast of the Block Island. So not only do we have a very upset former keeper's wife, but we also have a ghost ship.
Yeah. So, fixed. Everything's good.
All good?
All good.
Okay. We have a ship going by the way. It's really cool.
Oh, yeah.
It's sneaking by. Unfortunately, the camera's not angled that way.
Nope. And I don't know what would happen if we even tried.
Yeah, we're not going to try that.
Yeah. So, anyways, last stop for this evening. We got one more stop.
We're hopping up to Maine.
Yep.
Because Maine.
We really stayed very kind of relatively localized on this one.
Yes,
but there's so many.
There's so many lighthouses.
There's so many. So, maybe, yeah.
And we haven't even touched international ones yet.
No, we haven't. So, yes. Anyways, this last stop up in Maine is called Owl's Head Lighthouse.
I've been there.
Oh, you visited Owl's Head?
Yeah.
It's a cool
It was on
lighthouse.
our list,
Yeah.
but we haven't gone.
Yes.
We got pictures of it.
Nice. You've been to a haunted lighthouse then. So,
Ooh.
anyway, so nobody's quite sure how Owl's Head got its name, but there are plenty of theories. We know that when Owl's Head was visited by Samuel de Champlain in 1605, it was known as Betabetic Point, an Indian word meaning Cape of the Winds. A couple hundred years ago, the growing lime trade in nearby Rockland and Thomason led to the establishment of a light station at Owl's Head, at the entrance to Rockland Harbor. President John Quincy Adams authorized the building of Owl's Head Light in 1825. A tall lighthouse was not necessary because of the height of the promontory. The light is exactly 100 feet above sea level. The lighthouse that stands there today is not the original, as the 1825 tower was replaced with the present one in 1852. The establishment of the lighthouse was set with drama from the very beginning. President Adams and the fifth auditor, Stephen Pleasanton, in charge of lighthouses, clashed over the appointment of the first keeper. President Adams's candidate won out, of course, and Isaac Stearns became the first keeper. Stearns, a Massachusetts native and a veteran of the War of 1812, was 32 years old when the light went into service. He and his wife, Lucy, had 3 sons and 3 daughters, and once Lucy Stearns went to the lighthouse to trim the wicks, she was knocked from the summit by a gust of wind and narrowly escaped being blown into the sea. In spite of the dangers, a system of walkways and stairs leading from the dwelling to the lighthouse wasn't added until 1874. The original lamps and reflectors were replaced by a 4th order Fresnel lens in 1856, and the lens remains in use today. In 1831, Captain Derby of the revenue cutter Morris proclaimed the lighthouse the most miserable one on the whole coast. He reported that the mortar was nothing but sand and that stones were dropping out. He feared the tower wouldn't stand much longer. Repairs were carried out in 1832, but the station was in deplorable condition when I.W.P. Lewis visited for a report to Congress in 1843. The interior of the tower was coated with ice in winter and was generally in a filthy state. 10 panes of glass were broken and the wrought iron lantern, and the lamps and reflectors were out of alignment. The dwelling was just as bad, with bad mortar, a leaky roof, and badly cracked walls. Penley Haynes had been keeper since July of 1841. In a statement for Lewis, he described the tower as in a state of entire dilapidation and decay from top to bottom. The dwelling had been repaired only 2 years earlier, but Haynes reported that it was all falling to pieces. The kitchen, he feared, would soon collapse if not repaired. It appears that no significant improvements had been made by an August 1850 inspection, which reported tower is in a bad state and the lantern rusted very much. Dwelling house also wants to be new. One of the most memorable events in the history of Owl's Head Light took place during a storm on December 22nd, 1850. 5 vessels went aground in the storm between Rockland Harbor and Spruce Head. At nearby Jameson's Point, a small schooner from Massachusetts was anchored. The captain had gone ashore, leaving the mate, Richard B. Ingram, a seaman named Roger Elliott, and one passenger, Lydia Dyer, who was engaged to Ingram. The packet was to start for Boston the next morning. Near midnight, the storm intensified. The cables holding the vessel snapped, and the schooner headed aground across Penobscot Bay Penobscot Bay toward Owl's Head. It quickly smashed into the rocky ledges south of the lighthouse. The 3 on board huddled together on the deck and were soon practically frozen in the surf. They pulled blankets around themselves in an effort to stay dry. As the schooner broke apart, Elliot escaped the vessel and managed to climb over the icy-covered rocks to the shore. Practically dead from exhaustion, he reached the road to the lighthouse. The keeper happened to be driving by in a sleigh, and he took the dazed Elliot to the keeper's house, where he gave him hot rum and put him in a bed. Barely able to speak, Elliot was able to tell the keeper about the others still on the schooner. A dozen men were rounded up, and they headed for the shore. The rescue party soon found the schooner and got on board. There they found a block of ice enveloping Ingram and Dyer. From all appearances, the couple was dead, but the rescue party was determined to leave nothing to chance. The men brought the block to the kitchen of the keeper's house. They chipped the ice away, keeping the pair in cold water. Then they slowly raised the temperature of the water and began to exercise the limbs of the victims. After almost 2 hours of this massaging and exercising, Lydia Dyer started showing signs of life. An hour later, Ingram opened his eyes and said, "What is all this? Where are we?" By the next day, Dyer and Ingram were able to eat, but it was months before they were fully recovered. They eventually married and had 4 children. Roger Elliott never fully recovered, but his struggle to reach safety had resulted in the rescue of the other two. Lydia Dyer and Richard Ingram will always be celebrated as the frozen couple of Owl's Head. The tower was rebuilt finally in 1852, and a new wood frame 1.5-story dwelling was built in 1854. Construction specifications published when the lighthouse tower was rebuilt stated the tower is to be built of the best hard burnt brick the form round, the foundation to be sunk as deep as may be necessary to make the whole fabric perfectly secure, and all of the bricks are to be laid in the best of Rosendale cement. Another interesting character would grace Owl's Head in the early 1930s. Augustus B. Hammer came to be Owl's Head as keeper in 1930. Keeper Hammer had a Springer Spaniel named Spot, who gained wide fame among local mariners. Spot learned to pull the rope that rang the fog bell with his teeth, a ritual he repeated for every approaching vessel. The boats would answer with a whistle or bell, and Spot would bark excitedly. Spot's unusual abilities turned out to be good for more than entertainment. One stormy night, a mail boat almost ran aground at Owl's Head. It was Spot's loud barking that warned the captain just in time and enabled him to steer clear of the rocks.
Later came Melvin Davis Jr., a Coast Guard officer in charge of 1965 to 1968. He shared his memories of Owl's Head in 2011, and here are some of the experts. At the time, it was a family light station. I considered it a choice of duty after spending most of my time at sea duty. It was like any duty, it had its responsibilities that were expected of me, especially as the officer in charge. When I first went to Owl's Head, the fog signal with sirens that took a bit of getting used to. I believe it was the summer of 1966. We had 40 days and nights of fog. The fog signal had run steady. The sirens would break down, and I would have to try to fix them. If I couldn't, I had to send out a notice to mariners and get a technician out as soon as possible. Shortly afterward, they replaced the sirens with horns. Sometimes during a bad storm, we'd lose power. I used to think that as I opened up that old creaky metal door and looked up the dark tower, Could it be true that these old lighthouses built back in the 1800s are really haunted by their past keepers? As I ascended the stairs using only a flashlight to guide my way, each footstep echoed through the tower, making my surroundings eerie and creepy. The tower was cold and damp and musty smelling. I remind myself that my mind was just playing tricks on me. All I had to do was my job and fix the light. After the light was lit again, I could see the interior of the tower once again, and the mariners were guided by its light. We weathered many storms on Owl's Head Light, but there was one I remember above them all. It was a fierce nor'easter. The wind howled and the snow blew to whiteout, and everything was cold. Everything was fine, then the lights went out. The alarm sounded and the generator kicked on and took over. After resettling all the alarms, things quieted down. It's around 8 or 9 p.m. Then around 10 p.m., everything seemed fine. The light was on, the fog signal was on, the generator was running fine, and I went to bed. Around 2 a.m., the alarm started going off and everything was in darkness. I jumped out of bed, I got dressed, I grabbed my flashlight and went out to investigate. By this time, the snow was well above my knees, and when I went to the generator house and opened the door, I got a full face of steam. After the steam subsided, I could see with my flashlight and saw that the fan to the engine blew apart and went through the radiator. I knew there was nothing I could do, so I had to get a notice to mariners out as soon as I could. Getting back to the house, I found the phone was dead also, so I couldn't call Rockland Coast Guard to get the notice out. I knew I had to get to the nearest phone, which was approximately 3 miles away, but I didn't know if their phone worked or not. So I knew how to try. I told my family the situation and told them all to stay in the kitchen area where the kerosene oil burner was going on with the stove. It was the only source of heat we had because no electrical power to run the furnace. I had a 4-wheel drive Jeep and knew that it was useless in the deep snow, so I charged through the blowing deep snow. I finally got to the house about 4 a.m., pounded on the door to wake the people up. They warmly welcomed me after they realized I was the light keeper. They gave me a cup of coffee to warm me up and gladly allowed me to use their phone to give the notice of mariners out. Later, I found out a tree had fallen across the wires to the lighthouse. Irving Smith of Owl's Head normally plowed out the lighthouse road with his pickup, but this time there was so much snow he had to use his bulldozer. After a few days, power was restored, the generator repaired, and Owl's Head Lighthouse was back in service for the mariners.
Today, the bell tower is gone, but an 1895 oil house remains. The wooden ramp and stairway leading to the tower are unique among New England lighthouses. In October 2006, Coastal Living magazine proclaimed Owl's Head Light #1 amongst America's haunted lighthouses. And there's no shortage of stories to back up that claim. Andy Germain was the Coast Guard keeper for a few years back in the mid-1980s. His wife, Denise, later told the Bangor Daily News about a particular night when her husband went outside to secure some construction materials. The tower and house were undergoing some renovations at the time. Denise rolled over and then felt her husband get back into bed, or so she thought. "How'd you make out outside?" she asked, but there was no reply. When she turned over, she saw the indentation of a body next to her. The indentation was moving as if an invisible person was shifting in bed. She recalled, "I'm a pretty practical person. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I'm positive it wasn't a dream." After a few minutes, she asked the visitor to go away so she could get some sleep. The next morning, Andy Germain told his wife that when he got out of bed the night before to go outside, he saw a cloud of smoke hovering over the door. The cloud, he said, went right through him and into the bedroom. Just after that, Denise had her encounter with the indentation. Debbie Graham, who lived at the station in 1987 and 88 with her husband, Coast Guard keeper Gerard Graham, and their young daughter Claire, says that the Germains warned her and her husband about the resident ghost when they moved in. The Grahams didn't take the warning seriously, and they chose an upstairs room that the Germains had said was particularly active to be Claire's bedroom. For the entire time that the Grahams lived at the lighthouse, Claire had an imaginary friend she later described as looking like an old sea captain. Once, in the middle of the night, Claire came into her parents' room excitedly telling them, "Fog's rolling in, time to put the foghorn on." Nobody had ever spoken of such things in front of her, and the Grahams were mystified by Claire's use of such jargon. Another common occurrence was the appearance of footsteps in the snow, seemingly beginning from nowhere and leading up to the wooden stairs that led to the lighthouse tower. According to the historian William O. Thompson, on some occasions the keepers would find the door to the tower open with the lens and brass inside freshly polished. Malcolm Roos, formerly at West Quiddy Lighthouse, was the last Coast Guard keeper at Owl's Head before its 1989 automation. He said that his wife insisted that the outline of a person dressed in white could be seen in one of the windows, and their son often woke up insisting that he saw a woman sitting in a chair in his room.
This spirit is known as the Little Lady. She is most often spotted in the kitchen and seems to be open and closing doors, rattling silverware. Those who have encountered her have claimed to experience a surprise feeling of calmness and peace. Most infer that she was the wife of one of the first keepers, or perhaps the old sea captain. In December of 2007, the Lighthouse Tower was licensed to the American Lighthouse Foundation, and then in late 2012, it was announced that the Keeper's House had also been licensed to the Lighthouse Foundation. It would serve as the organization's headquarters. The grounds are open daily, and there's a parking area and a moderate walk to the lighthouse. The Interpretation Center and gift shop is in the Keeper's House and are open seasonally, and the tower is sometimes open for climbing. It's definitely on our list to go and visit next time we're back up in Maine.
Yep. You must have drove right by it the last time we were up, or the only time we were up there. Yes.
Actually, I think it was around the other direction. We went this way. I think it was that way.
Well, in any case.
It was near where we were.
Yes.
But we just didn't have time to go. And, oh, yeah, that fog
I got
rolled
thinking of
in.
your mother and Aunt Patty and Uncle Bill. Owl's Head.
We'll have to look those up. I would like to see those now that I know that you've been there. But anyways,
we just got really dark.
We got really dark. Our apparently our tablets were providing most of the illumination in here. So anyways, thanks for tuning in. That was our last story for tonight. And
We'll be back in 1 week.
Yes, next week. We're doing back-to-back weeks because of scheduling.
Yes.
So back-to-back weeks, and it's going to be... Oh, what was it going to be?
Give me a second. I will pull it up on the phone. It will be... Dun, dun, dun. Nope, not the 22nd.
Firehouses. How to forget that? Haunted firehouses and fire museums. So, very specific niche category, if you will.
And actually, it's 2 weeks.
Is it?
Yeah, the 22nd.
Oh, wait, that's right. 2 weeks, and then we do back-to-back weeks. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, we will not be on next week.
Yeah, so we'll be on the 22nd and the 29th.
Yes. 2 weeks, then 1 week.
Yep.
Sorry.
He's trying to skip a list.
Hope we didn't get your hopes up too much. So, yes, we will be back in 2 weeks with the, haunted firehouses and firehouse museums. So,
and then on the 29th, Haunted Objects Part 2, which I need to get started on.
Yes, so we got a little work to do. But anyways, hope you enjoyed it. We love lighthouses. We hope you loved it as well.
Yes.
But, yes, and...
2 weeks, then 1 week. Yes, Patrick.
Yes. Yes, and yes. And everybody says hello back to you all. Thank you so much for watching.
Yes.
And yeah, I think that's it.
Yep. And we will see you all later. Have a good night.
Wait. Yeah, so I guess before the next show, we do have one special event between now and then. We have the John Marshall House tour on the 20th, right?
I believe so. I'm looking. It's loading.
So, yes. So come on out. We got lots of tours. It's summer months, so we got lots of tours going on.
Yes.
But we do have one special event that is going to be on the 20th of July, where we're working with our friends at the John Marshall House again. So if you want to come out for a special event, that will be the night to do it.
Yep. 7 and 8 p.m. are those tour nights. And of course, CPRI will be there with us as well. I will not be Brad this time. I'll be another member, but that's okay. It's still CPRI.
They're all delightful. So, all right. Well, with that, we will go ahead. We will bid you all a good night. And again, thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.